All right, so we're going to get started with the macro counting masterclass. We have a lot of people who are going to be watching this on recording. So thanks for being here. Same thing, Samantha. Thanks for being on. So we're going to be going over this one thing at a time and just kind of jumping into it and starting from the beginning, and then we'll go all the way into the actually making adjustments, fine tuning things, and really kind of optimizing the whole process. So we're going to go through a screen share. I'm just going to move this over. And screen share. Cool. Samantha, are you able to see this?
Yes.
Very nice. Okay, cool. So basically, we're going to be talking about macros and just starting from the very beginning. This is the guide that we sent out for everybody. So just to give an idea, zoom out a little bit more. Very nice. Okay. So when it comes to macros, the really kind of three things we're going to be talking about are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Now, all macros have calories in it. So we'll talk about this in a little bit too, but protein is basically going to be just the building blocks of our body. Fat is a huge hormonal regulator, and then carbohydrates are really just like a system for energy, if that makes sense. It's a temporary storage of energy is all it is, to really kind of help us move forward and get to where we want to be. We have a list of the proteins, fats, and carbs on the next couple pages, but just to give you an idea that when we talk about calorie counting, if we're counting our proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, we will be tracking our calories at the same time. There are a lot of people who track calories per se, but they may not be tracking their macros, if that makes sense. So when you track your proteins, fats, and carbs, you are going to be also at the same time tracking your macros, which is really, really nice, right? So when it comes to protein, protein's probably out of the three of them to track. Protein and overall calorie amount are probably going to be the most important ones. The big reason why is that, and this isn't talked about too much, but protein's one is very filling for the body. So out of fats and carbohydrates, you're going to be the most full off protein pretty much. And there's also a huge benefit, which is what's called its thermic effect. So thermic effective feeding is basically 25% of the calories that you eat from protein is spent breaking itself down. It's a complex thing to break down, which is a benefit, not a disadvantage. I think sometimes we hear people say that protein's hard to digest, therefore it's not good for you, but that difficulty to digest is actually a huge benefit when it comes to body composition change. So being able to digest, taking a long time to digest causes more energy. It's more logistics for your body. And because it's harder to digest, it builds you up longer. On the other side, something like pure sugar it starts to digest in your mouth. Like the second it hits your literal, your mouth, it starts to break down due to enzymes in your saliva. And that's the other side of it, right? You absorb almost everything. We'll get into that in a little bit. So it taking a long time to break down is beneficial, but also we get the benefits of muscle mass and body mass from protein as well. All those things combined make it probably the most important thing. And we'll talk about how much in a little bit. Fats, this is a huge thing. When it comes to the second thing where we want to make sure we're getting enough of, it's probably going to be fats. And not to say that carbohydrates are last on the totem pole, but we want to make sure you're having enough fat to fuel the body with the right kind of hormones. And this is mainly sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone that are going to be beneficial for body composition. Now, how much you have is going to be preference, but there is a minimum that we need to have, which is roughly going to be about 25% of our overall calories that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So fat is where we're going to be getting things like whether it's like almonds, avocados, fish oil, things like that are all really helpful fats. And we'll talk about much more sources where they come from in a little bit. And then carbohydrates, as I mentioned, these are just simple processes for the body. These are things that tend to get a bad rap. And I think it's because maybe not everybody fully understands what carbohydrates are. We blame things like donuts or things like cookies for carbohydrates when they also have high amounts of high amounts of fat and butter as well. But to give you an idea, these are going to be things like pasta, rice, potatoes, fruit, which can all be very beneficial as well. And we'll talk about why we should be having these a little bit more. If you guys want these lists, there are some lists on here that allow us to bring into these really cool handouts as well. So these are attached. Whoops, let me get back to this. These are the attachments as well that are on here, and we can go over these in a little bit as we talk about this. So this is a really helpful diagram. Now, not every food we eat, and we'll talk about what's called a macro dominant food, but not everything we're going to be eating is going to be nice and neatly wrapped, right? So when you look at this diagram, this is a really helpful way to kind of see what's going on. Some foods are much more dominant in things like in macros like rice, but rice still has a little bit of other protein in it and a very tiny amount of fat. And we just had somebody jump on. Hey, Preeti, thanks for being here. We're just getting started with this, and we are recording, just to let you know. So if you have any questions, always let me know. We're going to be going over this stuff pretty systematically. But so as I was mentioning, is not everything is really neatly wrapped. Some things like oils for fat are pretty much only 100% of that. Something like sugar, like pure sugar, is going to be 100% carbohydrates, right? But a lot of things we have is a blend of it. So to keep things simple, we do typically like when it does come to logging in the future, it does help to select what we'd call macro dominant food, which is something that's pretty much only or 90% of a source. So like something like shrimp under protein is pretty much like 90% protein. There's going to be a little bit of other stuff in it, but for the most part, it's pretty much protein. And all these things on this column are going to be that way. And vice versa, we have things like lentils and beans, Fairlife milk, Greek yogurt, which is a combination of protein and carbs. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some things are more dominant. Something like beans will have about 7 grams of protein and about 28 grams of carbohydrates in it, right? So it's not necessarily one or the other, but it's a little bit of a blend of each, maybe not 50-50. And this is important to know because when it comes to organizing, we do want to mostly pick dominant ones because logistically it's just easier, mostly from a logistic standpoint, not from a problem. And in the middle, we obviously have things that are a pretty large combination of stuff. I put protein bars in here because while protein bars have more protein than a Snickers bar, a lot of protein bars will have like 20 grams of protein, 20 grams of carbohydrates, and several grams of fat, which ends up balancing itself out, which is, as even though they're marketed as a protein bar, they're kind of like an even amount of everything. So, and if you guys have any questions on this, does anybody kind of have any questions on this specifically, or like macronutrients in general on this kind of topic? If not, it's okay. Cool, not a problem. So pretty straightforward. This is just a helpful organization of it. We really just kind of want you going off. We'll talk about a little bit more about this in a minute. So when we talked earlier, I mentioned that things have calories in it, right? And we overall get into calories quite a bit. Now, if you're counting your macros, I mentioned that you are going to be counting your calories. And this is still the most important thing. The problem with calories is that it's not as clear cut as people realize it is. And mostly, as I say, like the general like population, calories come from all over the place. Everything we eat has calories in it. And then all it is just a unit of energy. It's the literal, like a kilocalorie is the literal amount of heat it takes to heat 1 kilogram of water, 1 degree Celsius. That's the exact definition of a calorie. It's just heat energy. So when you have fats have 9 calories per gram. Carbs have 4, protein has 4, and alcohol has 7. Now, alcohol is technically a macronutrient, but you don't have, it's not the same, like when you look in MyFitnessPal, it's not going to be the same in terms of like when you, there isn't a slot for it. And the reason why is there's no daily amount of alcohol you're supposed to have, if that makes sense. It's something that you'll consume, but technically there isn't like, it's not like there's a minimum amount of carbs. Like there's a minimum amount of carbs you should have, sort of. There's a minimum amount of protein and fats that you should definitely have, but alcohol isn't technically part of that, while it does have calories. So just to give you an idea, now when it comes to, and I made this note here, but there's a lot of people that'll say that like, if we only count our calories and that's all we look at, that's probably going to be about 50 to 60% of your results. If you count macros which as I mentioned, will also count your calories, that's about 75 to 80% of your goal. So it's a pretty significant amount. Is it every little thing? No, there's some other stuff in here, whether it's about nutrient timing, whether it's about like when you eat, how often you eat, and the quality of food. So not looking at like, it could be the difference between, we're talking about sugar and fruit as a really good example, or sugar and a potato. That difference is going to be very small. So what we're talking about today is going to make up a vast amount of the results, but not every single drop of the results, if that makes sense. But doing this, once again, like if you're not looking to step on stage and be that lean, that last 15% may not matter, or may not matter as much. So we'll get into that in a little bit. How much you should be having, and this is where things really kind of get crazy. If you're using MyFitnessPal already, there's already a calorie calculator in it. If not, I use this one. Now, wherever we start with your calories and macros, all that is a starting place. And I really want to make this as an example, is that everything we do, from the calorie calculators to how much we burn to logging your food, everything is an estimation. We're talking estimations on estimations on estimations on estimations. Because of that, we don't need to be one super exact. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But also, all this is a starting place. What I really want to do with this info is, once we figure out what your calories are and a starting place, we just want to see how your body responds and then make adjustments from there, right? Like if I give you, like theoretically, if I gave Samantha 1,400 calories to start and whatever the macros are for that, I want to see how does Samantha's body respond after a week of it. And then based on that, we can make adjustments. It might be too much food. You might be too hungry. Maybe it's you feel great and you lose weight. Those are all things that we're looking for. What often I think happens is people have a calorie calculator and they assume they need to be on that amount for the rest of their life. But the human body is just far too complicated for us to just use a math formula to give you the exact answer. So we're just looking for estimations of it. So to do that, once we have your estimation, the next thing we want to do, and this is kind of important, is when we talk about weight loss goals, and this is for if you're starting from ground one. Preeti and Samantha, you're both not starting from ground one. You've both been doing this for a little while. Samantha, it sounds like you've been doing it for quite a bit. And then Preeti, obviously, since we've been working together. But we don't want to start with an extreme goal. One of the reasons I don't like to start with an extreme goal is I want to get on the starting place and I want to make adjustments as we go. So as in, if I gave Samantha that 1,400 calories and you don't lose any weight, that's okay. We can always take a little bit more away if that makes sense. But if I start Samantha with like 1,100 calories, it's really hard to backtrack, in my opinion, because then we want to realize like, well, what's going on? Is she really doing it right? What's kind of happening? And backtracking is a lot harder to do than just constantly starting at a high place and moving forward, if that makes sense. So, and at least that's my big opinion, because we can always keep chipping away to get you in the right direction. It's really hard to figure out like what's going on when somebody's under eating and getting in the right place. And that can be a very difficult position. So that's at least when it comes to the amounts. The other thing I would encourage you to do is one of the other things we tend to see is when people are doing their calories on their own is they overestimate how active they are. I would almost always, unless you are literally on your feet like 8 hours a day, or at least 4 to 8 hours a day on your feet, I would almost always set your activity level to sedentary. There is what's called active sedentary, which is like even if you're working out 4 or 5 days a week, like that hour of exercise, regardless of how intense it is not enough activity to move you out of the sedentary, like quote unquote sedentary space. That doesn't mean what you're doing is wrong or bad. When it comes to just like, I guess it would be the medical community, it's still considered sedentary. So just as an FYI, now if you are on your feet an extraordinary amount of hours, then we would set it a little bit higher. But I often see people overset their activity level and overestimate how much they should be having. Questions on those first two bullet points? If not, it's okay. Okay, cool. So next thing, and this is the hard one, is setting your protein amount. This split right here. So the protein amount, there's definitely a range for this. Now it's 0.8 grams on the low side per pound to 1.2 grams per pound, which 1.2 grams is on the high side. Now this adjustment, the reason why there's a range here has to do with how heavy or how much fat somebody is carrying. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but if somebody is 260 pounds and they have just more fat tissue, we're going to be on the lower side of this. Protein is relative to how much lean body mass you have. So if somebody is 180 pounds and they're very lean, we might want to maximize this 1.2 end. If somebody's on the lower side, we're probably going to want to teeter maybe on the 0.8. One of the things that is very, very difficult that I've noticed, especially with a lot of the female clients and just our ladies in general, tends to be just getting it in is very challenging. Getting to this high end of this 1.2 can be very, very difficult logistically for people to get in, which is why we also may want to start on the lower side and scale up over time. Now, is there such thing as too much protein? Not really. We just may not see as much benefit to it. To be thorough, if you had to overeat any macronutrient, overeating protein causes the least fat gain out of those. If you had to overeat, so if somebody's on here, I think we have a couple of people who signed up who are looking to gain weight. And for them, if you want to go a little bit higher, there's nothing wrong. But in terms of like optimizing the body, the studies are clear at around this 1.2 grams is probably the limit you want to have. There's no necessarily more benefit to eating more for like muscle mass. When you're dieting down, especially as your calories get lower, we definitely want to teeter on this higher end. And we'll talk about why that is later. The lower your calories get, the more risk you are for losing lean body mass, and the higher you're going to want to be in this 1.2 gram range. But starting with the 1.8 could be quite a bit. So as an example, if somebody is 120 pounds, that's just doing the math in my head because I like this, is it's about 96 grams if we're on the low side. So 96 grams a day if you're 120 pounds on the lower end of that. On the higher end, that person who's 120 pounds could definitely eat 120 grams of protein a day. That might be a little hard to get to. On the high end, 120 would be 144 grams of protein. I only know that because I've done this with so many people, I can do that number off the top of my head. You don't need to be exact. Is it like the difference between 96 and 95 grams is nothing? Like it's zero. So if you'd rather just round it up or down a little bit to make it easy to remember, that's a-okay. So don't worry too much about that. So once we have your protein set, I have a video. Oh, this one isn't linked. I'll send this. I'll make sure I get you guys the link to this. But once you have that set, now if you're doing it percentage, so Samantha, you mentioned that you're not using premium. So if you're not using the premium MyFitnessPal, what you want to do is do this number on like maybe a calculator, and then you're going to want to adjust the percentage of your calories first to a number close enough. Maybe a little higher than a little lower, if that makes sense. But for the most part, you're going to want to make that adjustment to try to get as close to this number as you can. Does that make sense? And if you have any questions, let me know on that. We'll go over. I want to make sure that this is really understood because this is a pretty important part.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So, and for anybody else, what I'm saying is if Samantha's if you're 140 pounds, 0.8 would be what would 0.8 be at 140? 80, 32, 112. So it'd be 112 grams of protein. So if you're setting it, because premium only works in it works in percentages of units of 5. So like 30%, 35%, 40%. So the goal would be to set it like as close as you can, which is probably going to be between 30 and 40% is usually where it falls. So as long as you're in that ratio and you're pretty close, it's close enough. So you'll be okay. After that, I like to set my fat percent. And this fat percent, I just base it on preference. The lowest I would go would be 25. There are some hormonal things that happen under 25. If you eat too low fat for too long, there is some hormonal issues, as we mentioned, with especially with cholesterol and especially with fat-based hormones, which is testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. It is important that we do teeter on the higher, not the higher end, but the minimum, which would be about 20 to 25%, which would be the bottom end of that. There are times where, and just to be thorough with this, if you are trying to diet down for like a show or a wedding, where we might bottom this out to like 10% for maybe a week or two, but we would never want to be there for longer than a couple weeks. So temporarily and understanding it's a short term, sure, but we wouldn't want to be under the 20% mark for very long. 25 is a pretty safe place. Now, if you enjoy fats, and this is where preference comes in, if you enjoy more fatty-based foods, like you enjoy avocados more, oils, fattier cuts of meat, more nuts and things like that in your diet, there's nothing wrong with having this a little higher. It's okay. Now, the high end, I just put 35. Could you go even higher, something like 50%, 60%? Sure. But the issue with going higher means there's less carbs, because that's what the remainder is going to be. And we want to make sure you're having enough carbohydrates to fuel your workouts. Now, there's nothing wrong with having more carbohydrates. The difference between these two is really preference. So if you'd rather have more carbohydrates, you can set your fat a little bit lower to the 25. If you'd rather have less carbohydrates and more fat, you can always switch it. Now, the only time I would overdo that, like I would want to make sure you're getting in more carbohydrates, is if you feel like your workouts are suffering, if you feel like maybe you don't have enough energy, or that you just like carbohydrates and you're not feeling like you're getting enough. So that's where we kind of play around with these percentages, and these are really preference. Is there a huge fat loss difference between eating less fat or eating more fat, or vice versa? Not really. The evidence is pretty solid that it's just going to be based on what you would rather enjoy for the long term. So if you'd rather have more fats, knock yourself out. If you'd rather have more carbs, sure. I tend to be on the lower fat side. I tend to be in the 25% because I enjoy eating my rice. I like it. So, and tortillas, I'm all about it. So I usually will teeter a little bit less on the fat side and a little bit more on like potatoes and rice because I enjoy that stuff. So questions, do anybody have questions on how much we should be having each of these? I know this is a pretty quick overview of that. Does that at least answer like how much protein you should be having and kind of the other stuff? Cool. Okay, great. So if there's no questions, we're going to move on. The other thing too is, once again, this is all a starting place. Once you get moving, things will change. So don't obsess about this. If you want to have a little bit more protein later because maybe you're not losing as much fat as you would like, by all means, we can always ramp up protein up to this 1.2 if we would like, as long as you feel like you're getting enough stuff. So don't feel you're locked into whatever you're doing. It's totally okay to play around with this a little bit and see what's going on. Now, just to touch upon this, because some people in the guide talked about hunger. So I do want to go over hunger. So not all foods are equally like calorie for calorie. As I mentioned, calorie is just a unit of energy. That's all it is. So energy for energy, some foods are more filling than others. And where we tend to see this are things that are like this on this side. So foods that have what's called a satiety index, this is an actual study that was done, are going to be higher on that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Foods that have more water volume, foods that have higher protein amounts, foods that typically are less processed, high fiber, fruits, veggies, things that you have to chew more tend to be on the more filling side of this, right? So an example would be something that has more water volume, which would be like a potato, like boiled potatoes, or even if you were to like chop them up and maybe make mashed potatoes without a lot of butter, right? Like that has a lot of water volume. Fruits have a lot of water volume. Vegetables, which are down here, have a lot of water volume, right? Especially compared to like bread. So bread does not have a lot of water volume. And because of that, and because when you chew it, it shrinks down, taking up less space, that space does affect how filling it is. So we want to make sure that we are maximizing how full you feel with things like this. And I have a list of that down below, versus things that are like this. Now, there's nothing wrong with having, if you want to have a Snickers bar here and there because you enjoy it, knock yourself out. I just say Snickers bar because that used to be one of my go-to craving things. I would just always want one. But as long as you are feeling full and you're getting towards your macros, you can still sneak in this stuff. But if you're very hungry all day and you're having things that are more on this side, or a really good example is we had a client a while ago whose most of her protein was coming from shakes. And we got her to, and it was tough because we got her to switch to mostly eating her protein, so meats and then legumes and things like that. But she felt a lot more full when she went that route, and that left her a little bit of calories to enjoy more of this stuff. So liquid calories there's nothing wrong with them, but if you are hungry, I would encourage you to make more of a switch over onto this side of the list, so that way we can maximize how full you feel, because the hungrier you are, the more likely you are to fall off your diet. And that's no fun, right? We want you to be able to feel like you're lasting a long time and really kind of making your way through everything. So if you have any questions on that, there's just a list of that stuff. So proteins, white fish, skinless chicken breast, lean steak, these are really just lean proteins. They have a lot of volume to it. Like if you've actually had to measure out a serving of Greek yogurt, it's a lot. It's like 220 grams, which is like a half a pound. It's a pretty hefty chunk of food. And especially when you consider that 220 grams is only like 120 calories of it, it ends up being a significant amount of food, right? Most low-fat meats, nuts, seeds, avocados, compared to, this would be compared to like oils and butter, if that makes sense. I think carbs in general, potatoes, apples, berries, cherry. Now, that doesn't mean you should only eat these things. Once again, it's just saying that these are more filling. So making sure you're having a moderate amount of this stuff goes a really long way. Cool. Now there was something, oh, we'll get into that a little bit later about showing you what this kind of looks like. So questions in kind of this list or like the hunger list and kind of what goes on here. Cool, very nice. Excellent, yeah. So mostly eating whole foods. Now this is how we actually get up to setting up MFP. Both of you guys are MyFitnessPal. Both of you have this set up. So this gets into adjusting the numbers and we'll like going into that. This video specifically right here, we'll get into that in detail of like how to set up your calories and how to make those adjustments, just like what we were talking about earlier, Sam. So if you do have any questions or anybody is like, how do I adjust those calories that we talked about earlier? That video is right there. So you can get into that. But for sakes and purposes, I guess I could bring that up really quick just to show you where it is. MyFitnessPal. Very nice. So usually what it is going to be, you're going to want to go to settings. And on the phone, it's a little different, but it goes settings, and then we'll go to goals, which is goals. And then once we click on goals, we have nutrition goals, calories by meal. Now I have premium, so I can set calories per meal and other days. But I'm just going to go into edit. And then from here, I'm going to switch to percentage just to show you. So this is roughly what my current percentage is. So here, as I mentioned, you can select it by up or down. Now it has to be at 100%. So if I drop my carbs down, I have to increase something like my fat, right? To get back to 100. And then this tells you how many grams each one it is. I don't like having that little carbohydrates. I'd rather have a little bit less and be there. Now, if you are doing it by macros, I can switch to set it by grams. And these are my literal macros. It's actually this. It was actually 160 on a low day. I think it's 55 on a high day. And these are my literal macros I'm having currently. I'm having 190 grams of protein, 55 grams of fat, and 160 grams of carbs. And then I do have, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I actually do have a day, I'm gonna hit save changes. I do have a day where you actually can't see it from here. Oh, here you can see it right here. Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Actually don't, oh, here it is, sorry. So I'm not used to 100% doing this from my desktop, but I do have a daily goal. My Sunday goal you can see is outrageous. That's because this Sunday I have a lot of activity, and I'll talk about having a day where you have a lot of calories on it, but not necessarily calling it a cheat day. So this is kind of how you set it up in here under the nutrition goals. If you have premium, you can set specific daily goals, if that makes sense. And we can kind of mess around with that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, and that's all in here. Once again, if you're not familiar with weighing your foods, there's a video right here for that as well. So that way we're pretty straightforward. Now, if you have any questions, you can just jump off mute and ask. There's nothing wrong with that stuff about setting those and making those adjustments. So
I have a question, Adrian. I know you went over setting your macros in MyFitnessPal. How important is it? So like if I'm hitting my daily protein goal, but going a little over my carb goal, is that like, how important is it to stay within your carb goals as well?
That's a good question. So there's two parts to that. I'm gonna jump off the screen share for a second. So there's two parts to really kind of answer on that. One is that going over your carb, because every carb has calories in it, going over your carbs could overdo your calories. Now, I obviously am more familiar with your situation because you're looking at your plan, but what we want to make sure is that we're not they're not necessarily untethered. So some people, when they go over their carbs, they also go over on calories, and to how much over is important, as in 5-6 grams, maybe not a big deal, right? Like there's a pretty significant margin for error. But if you're going way over, then it can be a problem because we're going over so much that it could be offsetting the amount needed for results. Now, the actual answer is, well, what is happening in your results? So if, let's say we're going over on our carbs, that also might mean we're going under elsewhere, as in fat too. And that's just if you are staying within your calories. Going under on your fat for too long can have a problem in terms of like hormonally what's going on. We want to make sure you're getting enough of that. But the real answer is, if you're going over and you're getting results, it's not a problem. But if you're going over and you're not getting results, then we're going to want to bring it down and tighten it up a little bit and seeing what happens. The most important thing is always looking back to what is the outcome of what's going on, as in like, are you losing weight? Are you not losing weight? And looking at it from that side, or I shouldn't say just weight loss, but fat loss as well. Or if you're trying to gain weight, you're trying to gain weight as well, right? So the outcome is also really important. Now we'll talk about how close you are consistently a little bit later, like what is a margin for error? And just to kind of, I guess, answer that really quick, and we can double down on it later as we talk about result interpreting. But we want to stay within 5 grams roughly over or under until we can say like that's acceptable. Now it's 5 grams in a week. So going over on one day, not a big deal. Going over 7 days, it can add up, if that makes sense. But there is, we'll get into that a little bit more in detail, and I'll have some graphs on that a little bit later, if that's okay.
Yeah, that answers my question. Yeah.
Yeah, not a problem. And then let's go back to screen share. Cool. Very nice. Okay, great. So reading food labels. Now this is important to talk about because when we talk about scanning things in or entering stuff, one of the things that I do want to go over is this. And this is where I feel a lot of people get tripped up on, but also food labeling is a nightmare with some people. Some companies are really, really tricky about this. So what I always want you to first look at is the serving size. Now, this is an actual updated nutrition label as of like 2021. This is what it looks like now. So older food labels look a little different. But just to give you an idea, the serving size is important. Now, there's a cookie that a protein cookie I used to get. It's called the Complete Cookie. And the Complete Cookie advertises, when you flip it over, it says it's 250 grams or 250 calories. What they don't tell you is that one cookie is 2 servings. So it's very easy to flip it over. And if you're not familiar with the serving size, realizing that what you're looking at has twice the amount of calories of what's going on. And that's why I put the serving size first, because whatever we're reading down here is really relative to the serving amount. And some things aren't as clear cut, which is why I wanted to bring that up first. After that, we'd always look at the overall calorie amounts. And then from there, we look at our actual macronutrients, right? Our proteins is what I look at first. And then I'll kind of look at the different carbs and fats. And then I just judge things based on that. I do put priority 4 as fiber, sugar, and trans fat, because for some people, this is still more important. But in general, if you're in a pretty healthy body weight, it's not going to be as relevant. Now, the reason I am bringing that up too is I know a lot of people who will put, if something has like 2 grams of sugar compared to 1 gram of sugar, or 5 grams of sugar compared to 1 gram of sugar, that stuff is going to be less relevant for your results compared to the net effect of how much it has. What are the overall carbohydrates it has? What are the overall calories it has, right? So that stuff is very, very, I guess it would be like to the 3rd degree, tertiary, I think is what it is, compared to the total amount of calories and the amount of macronutrients it has. So when I'm looking at like comparing 2 pieces of bread, just as an example, I might look in the back, are the 2 pieces of bread pretty similar in calories? If they are, I might look at, are the carbohydrates similar in calories? And I mean carbohydrates, are the carbohydrates and proteins pretty similar? If everything's pretty similar and there's not a substantial difference, then I just go on which one I'd rather enjoy, if that makes sense, and which one I feel fills me up a little bit more. Now, a good example of this is that some breads, when you flip it over, might be 110 calories, while other ones might be 90. So in that situation, it's 20 calorie difference. But in my opinion, I'll be like, hey, I can have like two and a half of these. Like if I had 2.5 slices of the 90 calorie one, I can almost have the same amount if it was like 2 slices of the 110. So it just gives you an example, but that's where you want to compare. And it's just pro con. Would you rather have a little bit more or save those extra 40 calories for something else if you're having 2 slices of it? Or would you rather just enjoy yourself with the bread because it's more enjoyable for you at that situation? So that's just kind of what it goes over here. And then I give you some other examples in a video overview. And this is what I'm talking about here is food, what we call their calorie density. And this is the literal thing I was talking about, is that some things, oh man, why is that not highlighting? Is that some things have 2 servings in it for a single cookie, while some other ones will have different amounts of servings too. So this is also seen with like protein powders, which is really weird. So some protein powder scoops are 30 gram scoops. It's like the general default serving, but some protein powders will give you 40, 50-gram scoops and tell you they have more protein in it, but realistically it's the same. It's just a bigger serving size, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like false advertising. They advertise they have more protein per serving, but when you flip it over, you realize it's just they gave you a bigger serving and it's the same stuff. It's just they're just playing around with these numbers on the backside. Now, earlier we talked about fullness and like hunger, and we talked about this in general, that a larger serving size and a lower calorie amount, which is going to be from, from veggies, fruits, lean proteins, typically going to fill you up more. Things that have a smaller serving size and a higher calorie amount, these are things that we tend to overeat a lot more. And a really great link on this is this link right here. So I'm going to pop open, which is what does 200 calories look like? This is one of my favorite things to look at. This is what 200 calories of celery is. It's 50 ounces, so it's a little over 3 pounds. So it's 3 pounds of celery is 200 calories. And as we go down, you can see the serving size gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and foods become higher and higher in fat. So the point where you're at 28 grams of butter is 200 calories. So this is a great analogy. Now, there's nothing wrong with, if you want to have your 200 calories of butter here, there's nothing wrong with that. What we're saying, though, is that it's very easy to overeat this, overeat nuts, or overeat, what's going on here? Close that ad. Or going on with the or overeating M&Ms compared to overeating like mini peppers, right? Now, eating some Kisses, like the Hershey's Kiss, may be more gratifying. There's nothing wrong with that. But we want to make sure we're having plenty of the stuff that fills you up, so that way you're not too hungry and you're maximizing how much you're having. Questions on the label or the, like we're talking about like calorie amounts, calorie density? Cool. So this is some more tactical stuff. Now this is important. So when we talk about logging foods, this is a really important step. I would search when you're looking up a food for the USDA entry of it. One of the problems, the biggest problem with MyFitnessPal is when you go to search chicken, there are like 400 entries for chicken, but also some of them are self-entered foods. Even the green check marks can be off. I would search for the USDA, so like chicken breast, USDA, and then use that option. Now, the thing is whether it's a cooked or an uncooked one, the reality is you just want to be consistent with it. And then as long as you're consistent with the food selection and we're not changing the food selection over time, things will average out and you'll be okay. Whether it's the literal physical aspect, like the only way we can know that is taking it to a lab and testing it. But as long as we're consistent, the errors will kind of balance themselves out over time and it'll be okay. Stronger U is also a good option to do. They've been meticulous at copying the USDA amounts to go in. So if you had to search up, like, now some things aren't going to make sense, like USDA lasagna isn't going to work. If you're using lasagna, you're probably going to want to find a recipe that has the macros counted already, or scan something that has the macros on it from like how Costco has the pre-made lasagnas or things like that, if that makes sense. Or you can use those as reference points. So that is an important feature. If you can also scan food into it, and you'd scan food by selecting the barcode, if that makes sense, this icon in the MyFitnessPal, and scanning that way. One of the most problematic ones, though, is custom foods. Some things you're going to want a custom entry, like if you're following a recipe on Pinterest. But word to the wise, the more complicated a recipe is, the more of a hassle and the more error it is. Now, there's times where if you get good at custom entries, cool. But the thing is having a different food and a different entry every single time. This is where we see a lot of problems happen, where people like to have different, like every single meal ends up being this custom, this really complex recipe, and things just become an absolute headache for people. One of my mentors made a joke that was like, if it takes you 40 minutes to create a food in MFP, he's like, maybe you should try thinking about cooking something else. That's just a joke. Now, there's some truth into that, which is the more complicated it is, the more margin for error, the more errors that could happen along the process. So if you want to create a custom food, like following a recipe, cool. But if you're doing your own thing all the time, it can just be an absolute nightmare trying to follow this. I have a handful of things I have that are custom recipes, but for the most part, I like to keep my meals pretty simple, and mostly because I know that simplicity is a benefit when it comes to this journey. I also know that simplicity may not taste the best. So in that situation, we have some stuff for you a little bit later. Questions on this side, like these few things I talked about? Cool, I love it. So planning your day. This is something I would 100% encourage everybody to do, is to at least plan one day and being ultra meticulous about this for your day. So once you have your macros set, like Samantha, once you have your macros, you see what your percentages are. You're going to eat 110 grams of protein, 100 carbs, and 30 fat or whatever. I would take your time and get very detailed in doing at least one day. The reason why one day is because we can use that day as a reference point for relative how much protein you should have per meal, how many carbs you should have relative per meal, and how much fat you have per meal. So this ends up being a template that we could base everything else off of, if that makes sense, and kind of like a default option. And this is a really helpful tool, because when I have, in my MyFitnessPal, I had 3 different calorie days, which is definitely more advanced. But for each calorie day, I went through and I had a very detailed template to know what's the exact amount. So that way, every single day, I can not necessarily wing it, but it makes my journey a lot faster, because I'm like, oh, I know I'm supposed to be having at least six ounces of protein. And then maybe at the end of the day, I can adjust a little bit more based on that. Without doing this, people are always left knowing, am I eating enough? Or they'll find themselves constantly at the end of the day, not even close to their goal by a significant margin. And that's because we didn't take the time to plan a day ahead of time. Now, this might take a little while. I have a detailed video here on how to do it, but this is the process that you're going to do. And this is really important. So when I'm planning my day, I always start with entering my protein every meal first. And actually, I can just walk through this because I have MyFitnessPal up. So let me go to home. Let's actually go to food. Have I logged anything today? Perfect. Okay, great. Now this is like a cheat code because I already know how much I'm having. But what I'll do is this. I'll go to like breakfast, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get some protein into breakfast. Like if I had to do this from scratch. So for me, I actually don't like tilapia, but let's just slap some tilapia in here. I'm going to put 4. I know this is really tiny. This is a lot easier on your phone, to be honest. I think from the computer it's just a hassle. But I'm just going to add 4 ounces of tilapia for breakfast, right? And I'm actually going to do this for all my meals. I like to eat 4 meals in a day. So I'm going to go through and let's now go. I'm going to use once again, USDA chicken breast. I'm just going to start with a lower amount. With this one, I'm just going to put 3 ounces in. I don't want you to get caught up in too much in the amounts of each one. What I want you to do is just put some in every meal. And then what we do is we start adding in the other one. So once I have my protein in every meal, I have egg white somewhere. Let's do lean ground beef. Let's go with 4 ounces of lean ground beef. Nice. So what ends up happening is I have about 25. So I have 81 grams of protein. My goal is 190. I'm just going to add one more. Let's add one more snack. I'm just going to use a shake. Search for way. Sure. Cool. So now I'm a little bit closer, right? I'm still have a long way to go, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what I want to do is get a little bit into each meal. And then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to typically add some veggies, or like, what do I like to have as a veggie? I might add in, let's just go with peppers. I'm just going to make this as an example. I'm not going to be too thorough on what I actually enjoy here. Bell peppers, that works. And once again, you can search for the USDA amount. I don't want to take too much time searching for everything right now, just because of where we're at. 3 peppers. You can see that even with 3 mini bell peppers, it's like nothing. So I'm going to add some here just because I want to get some volume in. This is my chicken. Let's do onions. Search. So what I end up doing is I end up putting a little bit into each meal, right? And once I have a little bit in each meal, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in, let's just go with onions again. I'm just going to keep my life super simple. I'm a super simple eater. And then I'm actually going to have no veggies here with this shake. So once I have stuff in, what I want to do is just get some stuff on the board. And then I'll do my carbs through this, and then I'll do my fats through this. And then once I have a carb for each meal and a fat for each meal, then what I'll do is I'll go and I'll adjust each one So I'm like, oh man, I'm still really far from my protein. Well, instead of 4 ounces of protein, why don't I have 5 ounces of protein? And then I'll add a little bit to each meal this way. Instead of 4 ounces here, let's go to 4.5 ounces. And then I do little by little going through and seeing where it takes my macros. And if you do it this way, you get a little bit in every meal, and then you make some adjustments to each one, and you keep walking through this process. That's how you get to your macro amounts, because then I can adjust each one little by little. I go, oh man, I went over my protein. Well, hey, you know what? Instead of 4 ounces here, I'm going to go to 3.5 ounces. So I kind of go through and I set up first my protein, and then I'll add some veggies to make sure I'm getting it in, then my carbs and my fats. And then what I do is I go through each process. Now, the reason why we do that is, once again, when you do something like, let's just add rice in. Where's my rice? Whatever, I'll just use potato because it's the first thing I found. So when I add my potato in, my potatoes also have a little bit of protein, right? So, and they have a little bit of other stuff. Now, potatoes don't have very much fat. It's incredibly low. But the thing is that it'll add a little bit. So when you're scaling these up little by little, you'll eventually get to where you want to be, and then it'll eventually round everything out. And that's kind of how we want to set up a day like this, is unit by unit adding it through, just like we have here, which is you enter your protein, then you're going to enter your carbs, your fats, and your veggies. It's not particularly important which one you do first. You just want to make sure you get a little bit of everything in a meal just to balance it out. And then you fine tune from there. And then if you have a little bit of, if you realize there's some space left over, I would 100% add some treats in. And this is kind of something I really want to put on here. There's nothing wrong with having some treats in your plan as long as you have space and as long as you're not hungry by the end of the day. So if you want to fit in 200 calories of ice cream or something for your last meal, cool, by all means. But if you find yourself constantly hungry, you might want to use those 200 calories for something else, like, I don't know, like potato or rice or oatmeal or something like that. Any questions on this? This is an important slide because this is where I think when it comes to planning, people have a really hard time with trying to get the amounts in. But as long as you're within, and this is important, the goal isn't to be 100% perfect, what we'd call like a 000. So don't worry about getting so exact where you have zeros on everything, where there's no, like you hit your macros perfectly. If you're within 1 or 2 grams or 5 grams, hey, that's close enough. Like, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Once again, everything's an estimation of an estimation. I like to leave things in where things are simple. So even if I'm like 4 grams under on my carbs, but I'm using nice round numbers for my foods, I like that because it's simple to remember. I don't like doing things where I'm having 128 grams of blueberries. I hate that stuff. I'd rather just be like it's 120 grams of blueberries and leave it a little under, a little over, because mentally it just is a lot easier on me. That's my only recommendation. Preeti, did you have a question here, or saw you jumped off mute?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so can I do this planning on MyFitnessPal if I don't have the premium?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you do it the same way. You literally just enter the foods in. You just pick a day. You can do it as like a day before or a day in the future, right? And I just pick like I did when I was just doing it. This is for today. So like, am I literally going to eat this? Maybe not exactly, but I like to do this now and then just to get an exact detailed amount for where it's going to be. Now, let me see. Did I enter everything in yesterday? I did not. I didn't finish this up. So I left off. I actually have to scan something to put in here. But like for the most part, so I actually want to go. This is what I eat this breakfast, lunch, and dinner like this, with the exception of green beans on this because I ran out of green beans. Let's show this later actually. Let me go back to my diary. So this breakfast, lunch, and dinner for myself, I have this like every day. I enjoy it. I like it. I'm okay with having it. I do this like every day. And I'm okay with that. Some people may not be, but I came up with these entries when I did my planning before, like months ago, if that makes sense. And I just enjoy it. So then when I have to make adjustments, like I have to have a little bit, like let's say for whatever reason, I'm having a little bit less fat for my diet, I can just be like, hey, you know what? Instead of 1 of avocado, I could just have whatever, 0.75 ounces like that. And then I can make these adjustments.
Yeah,
so,
this is so helpful.
Yeah. This is planning a day is probably because once you have a framework and everything fits, then the goal is just to follow it, right? And now
Right.
even if I deviate off a meal, if I have 80, 70% of my day is relatively the same, like because I know, and even I can be like, hey, well, instead of chicken, I know I should have at least 5. It allows me to it allows you to follow the plan way better when you have an idea what it is. That doesn't mean you should eat the same thing every single day. While simple, there is a benefit in keeping things very simple and consistent, but at least you have an idea of how much egg whites or how much protein you should be having. And that way, at the end of the day, instead of you being off by 40 grams, you might find yourself off by like just 10. And in that situation, you can just, hey, for my last meal, I'm going to have 1 more ounce of protein or a little bit less of carbs or a little bit, it allows you to be way closer to the target and make those adjustments much, much, much easier.
Yeah.
Cool. Does that help with that?
Yeah, definitely.
So you can just do like, if you want, you can just do it in a day, like yesterday, you can just go through and fill that out, or you can do it like a day like tomorrow kind of thing, or even no matter what day you do. And then you can even print that out. Like you can download it and print it out, which is helpful, and stick it somewhere so you always see it. That's what I do. So some things for kicking butt. Once again, I just mentioned using the planned day that we just talked about as a template for future days. Super helpful tip. Eating similar foods, huge benefit. This is actually probably one of the biggest things I can recommend people to do is if you're eating similar things all the time, it makes your life really easy because similar foods like tilapia and chicken breast and like pork tenderloin all have very similar macronutrient profiles and are similar weights. So I can kind of substitute them at will, make different foods, but know they're all pretty close to the same. So that way, at the end of the day, I know I'm going to be relatively close to my goals. And then this is just another pro tip. We want you to make food super delicious. If you don't enjoy your food, it's a matter of time until you fall off plan. So that includes having things in your plan that you actually enjoy, like ice cream. And I know I say Snickers bars all the time. It's my go-to candy. But like things like that, do you actually enjoy from now and then? So just a couple tips. Something about snacking. Somebody asked about this in the guides. Snacking absolutely is to destroy your goals. And this is a huge one. Like the reason why snacking is a problem is typically because it's mindless. You don't remember how much you have, and it's vague amounts. So entering, like if you just had a bunch of like, if you just had a bunch of the goldfishies, right? How much did you have? Like if you most of the time when people snack, it's not a specific amount. It's on the go kind of thing. It's that fly, and people tend to eat more than they remember. And snacking isn't a problem here and there if it's planned. Like if you're having a snack just to hold you over because of your work schedule, usually I would say have a protein shake, have like a fruit, like an item of something, a tasty snack, have a tasty snack that's measured. So if you are having goldfish, you can measure out like 100 grams and stick it in a little to-go bag. But I never want people eating out of a box or eating an undisclosed amount because it is a nightmare to figure that out. Now, once again, doing it here and there, like let's say you had a bunch of goldfish 1 day a week, not a problem. The issue with snacking is it's typically a habitual thing that people do, and it tends to happen way more often than people realize. And there's a whole segment I added on this called mindless eating, which is going to be quite a bit later, which is going to be pretty valuable for going over this. So just be aware, snacking tends to be unfiltered eating, and it ends up being a big problem. Best time to log. So as I mentioned earlier, I mentioned talking about planning out your day. The absolute best time to log is before you eat it. So once you have your plan and you're going to deviate off it, it's important, I think the best time to do it is to log the food before you have it if you want to be meticulous. If you're going to be meticulous, that's fine. The reason why before is if you're going to enter, let's say you're having something that's not planned on your daily, the daily plan that we had. Let's say you're going to swap out something for a bunch of, let's say, rice and some fat, and let's say a couple of cookies, whatever. If you enter it ahead of time, you can see if you're going to go over your daily amount. And if you're going to go over, maybe like, wow, 6 ounces of rice is a little too much. Hey, you know what? But if I dial it down to 3 ounces, it's going to fit. That is huge because we can adjust in hindsight, not in hindsight, we can adjust before we eat it. If you just eat it and then log it, now we're operating like we can't go back and change how much we had. Now we can use that and reflect off it in the future. That makes sense. And we can see, maybe we can reflect on it in the next meal if we're adjusting it. but logging before allows the benefit of adjusting foods before we eat it to stay consistent. The next best place is going to be logging immediately after. And usually at this point, the next best time to log is as soon as we physically can. The reason why is we forget stuff all the time. It's very easy to forget how many drinks of soda somebody's had, exactly how many chips they ate, exactly what's going on, A, B, and C, the further away we get. We tend to omit things, not because we're purposely doing it, but our brain is designed to kind of forget things that are habitual and remember things that have distinct like memories tethered to it, if that makes sense. So eating is one of those things. I always bring up the old like 90s hamburger helper commercial, which is like, it was this commercial that would go around where this lady would ask people like, what did you eat on Tuesday? What did you eat like a week ago? And nobody remembers what they had multiple days ago. It's like to the point where it's such bad info that studies shouldn't even use the data because it's so off. But then they would be like, when did you have hamburger helper? And there was like, the question got real specific and people would remember specific things. But what we're going at with this is that if you can log immediately after a meal, please do it. If you can log it ahead of time, this is best. But the further away we get from the meal, the more error there's going to be, and the more chance for error there is. Now, if you want to sit at the end of the day and go back through and log some stuff, that's going to be okay. But the further we get, like trying to remember what you ate 3 days ago is going to be a big problem, because we're definitely going to leave exact amounts of things off the table. And like if you had an additional snack in a meal, that's going to be forgotten as well. So now, Preeti, this is what you're kind of asking earlier. This is really valuable, what we'd call a consistency check. Now, this is where I think a lot of people fall off. And then Samantha, I think this is going to be really helpful for you too, is there's a way to look at your weekly average. Now, a while ago, I had a client who came to me and she's like, Adrian, I'm hitting my protein every day. I'm doing this and that. And she was like adamant about it. But I'm like, something's not right. And I asked her to pull this up. I was like, can you pull it up? And we're going to look at how close you are to your weekly average. Now, just to give you an idea, this is how you get there. You go to, this is from your phone. You go to diary. You scroll to the bottom of your diary and there'll be two buttons. One of those buttons will say nutrition. The other one will say, I think this is actually a video on it. I'll just bring this up. It'll be a lot easier. So this is the YouTube and how to do it. We don't have to like walk through specifically, but this will walk you through that step process just to give you an idea. So, but it'll bring you to this screen. And on this screen, you see it has calories, nutrients, and macros. You click on nutrients and this little arrow, this week view right here, you can click on that. And this has week view, day view. I think there's a third option. I think that it's a custom option, but for the most part, I want you to shift to week view. And then what this tells us is what was your average for the week? Here's what your goal was. Here's how close you actually got. So with that client I was talking about, she was like, I'm hitting my protein. We made her do this and her goal was like 130 grams, but her average was 70 grams of protein, which means that she hit her protein some days, but it wasn't close when we averaged it out. And this is really valuable because the closer we are to an average, the better we're at. Now, a week ago, one of my clients was like, Adrian, like, how, it was kind of Preeti, one of the questions you asked, like, how, if I'm below, like, what if I'm under eating? What's the problem? The problem with under eating isn't that like it necessarily slows your metabolism. It does this dance of, is the problem a consistency thing, an overeating thing, and what's really going on? And when I see people under eating, my question is, are they secretly overeating and not logging it? And this is like actually what goes in my head is, are there meals that they're omitting because they forgot about it? Is there snacking going on that they're logging, or is there something else happening? And when that happens, my initial response is, I want them to get a really good week under their belt of logging everything and to see what's going on. Now, if everything is logged and I can see it, and the person's like, this is 100% what I ate, like definitively, and we're really close to the numbers, then we can just make some changes, like take some food away, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and get them to their goals. But the problem is with under eating, I'm always like, man, did they have like 3 beers and forget about it? Or do they actually not have, did they actually have what they said they did? So there's like an authenticity factor to it that makes it a problem. And that problem is mostly like me trying to figure out what's going on. If it's you doing this for yourself, you want to be dead honest. Was my week and was my entry really reflective of what I ate, or am I missing things? Am I forgetting things, and so on and so forth before we move forward? Now, this is an important step. This is one of the most important things I can encourage you to do, is look at how close you are to your macros. And this is where we want to be within 5 grams each one. Now, this example, I screenshotted this from, this is actually my week view. And I'm just gonna let you know, I've omitted some stuff this week. So for me, how close was I? Not close enough, right? So if I was doing this for myself and I'm like, man, I'm not getting results, I know I omitted things that probably would have bumped my carbs up a little bit higher. My protein, like, man, I didn't log my couple shakes at night. So I look at this and I go, okay, I'm gonna have another better week of logging before I make changes to my plan. That makes sense. And then if I get really close within a couple grams, then my answer is, okay, cool, I'm gonna go back through and now I'm gonna make some changes to keep moving me forward. Does that kind of make sense here?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And then, so did you say like if you had alcohol to log that in as well?
Yes, that's a really good question. I actually totally left that off this. Alcohol is really, really tricky because it's not, I'm scrolling way up at the top, because it's not, it's a macronutrient, it counts as calories. So when you look it up in MyFitnessPal, it'll have calories, but it won't have, it'll say zeros for everything else. So a couple things when that happens is I would use, where the hell is it? I would use the Stronger You entry here and alcohol. So like, it's not exact, but I'll say like light beer, and it'll give you what the Stronger You has done is taken the calories from alcohol and split it between carbs and fats. So that way it fits within MFP, if that makes sense. Because if you're logging your macros and you enter something that has 400 calories but 0 macronutrients, it looks really funky when you're looking at stuff. Like it just, whoops, I went too far. It just looks really, really silly when you're looking at it, if that makes sense. Cool. Yeah. So I would log it under that. And that way it'll shift some of the calories into fats and carbohydrates and balance it out a little bit better. Good question. Samantha, does that kind of make sense too with this? And then what we're kind of talking about right here? And if not,
Yes.
cool. So, and this is a step I think a lot of people do not do. And I think it's a really valuable one. Now, high calorie days, this is a little bit more advanced, but if you want to have a day where, let's say you want to go enjoy yourself with your significant other, or just a day, like I have a day that's, as we were showing you earlier, is I eat about 1,900 calories a day, but on my really high days, it's close to like 2,800 calories. I did that, and we'll talk about how I did that. Now, those calories come from somewhere. There's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. And I kind of hate using bad and good ways, but the incorrect way to do this is that you have your calories for the week, and then what people often do is they just add a cheat day on top of whatever they're eating, right? So the problem with that is now that we have one or a couple of days that are so high that it can literally pull you out of your results. The other problem with this option is that these calories are unaccounted for. So like we're now no longer, we're away from your debt, we're away from getting towards your results. But also the problem here is that we're just slapping food on top of it, and it's often very hard to log, and it's often not logged. So it makes a bunch of question marks for trying to figure out what's going on. What I say is just the awesome way to do this is what we do is we take some calories away from every day, and then we give it to you on one day. So an example would be, instead of having 1,600 calories a day, you have 1,500 calories a day, right? We take 100 calories away, and now you have most of your days are 1,500, and then you get one day that's 2,200 calories. So this is the way I think it should be done. And the reason why is that now, even if you go over, right? Like let's say you go over, this is a big buffer zone now. You have 600 or 700 more calories than this day to overeat. So now we have like a safety buffer. 2, it allows us to have a better chance at still staying within your goals. And 3, we can also plan this day out a little bit more. So you're like, yeah, I can have 3 slices of pizza and 2 next beers. And it's just accounted for, if that makes sense. So I would advise against having a full-blown like unfiltered eating. Now those days will happen. And when they happen, it is what it is. Just do your best to get back on track. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you want to have a set day a week to do that, this is how it's kind of go about it. Does that make sense for everybody? This is definitely a way if you want to have like a day that's higher calories, this is how you would go about it and still get to your goals. Cool. Now,
That makes sense. Can I ask another question? So if I'm eating out, but if I'm like eating like a salad or something that's healthy, it's a healthy option,
Mhm.
couple of times a week, will that ruin my like goals?
that's a good question. The problem, and this is what the problem isn't what you're eating. The problem is that it's more of an unknown variable. Whenever you're eating somewhere that like think of it like this: whenever you're eating somewhere that you're not in direct control over eating, it's a chance for the numbers to be wrong, and there's a chance for there to be an error. That doesn't mean you should never eat out, right? It means that like if you're eating at a different place every week, it can be an issue. If you're eating like the same salad every week because from X place because you like it and it's like a lunch you do, there's a less chance of it being a problem because even if we don't know exactly what it is, it's the same. So it's like even though it's like when you had to solve for variables in algebra, it's like we may not know what X is, but we could still like figure out the rest of the equation kind of without it, if that makes sense, and what its relationship is. So is it a problem eating? If you're going to eat out, and we'll actually talk about that in a little bit, there's some things that you can do if you know you're going to go there. My usual answer when I hear about people eating out and having salads is I'm usually like, I'd rather you have a salad somewhere else in the day. Like what I mean by salad, just a lower calorie, like a protein and veggie meal earlier in the day or somewhere else in the day, and then actually enjoy yourself at that dinner where you can go out and actually order something that's very tasty versus the other way around, if that makes sense. We'll actually talk a little bit more about that in a minute, Preeti. So actually we'll keep going and then I'll circle back to that. Actually, it's right here. So a couple of things. If you go over one day, as I mentioned, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's water under the bridge. The best thing I can say is just get back on track. You can compensate on other days, but if it's too much of a compensation where you're going to be super hungry, I would advise against it because adherence is really important. So if you're like, well, I went over by 1,000 calories and that taking 1,000 calories away from the rest of the week could be a problem, I wouldn't do it. I would just chalk it up for whatever and just keep moving forward. And I really mean that because last thing I want somebody to do is start under eating the rest of the days of the week to try to balance it out, find themselves be really hungry and then binge eat. That's what I want to avoid. I'd rather just be like, hey, whatever it is, what it is, get back on track, right? And that's going to be better for you long term. Going lean, this is what I'm saying, but Preeti, this is kind of a little bit more what I'm talking about. Like if you're going to go out to eat and you want to really enjoy yourself in one meal, you can always have protein and veggies. So like think of the calories within the day itself. You can always stack up protein and veggies earlier in the day. The reason why protein is, if you typically go out to eat somewhere, you're typically not going to overeat on your protein. You're typically going to overeat in your fats and carbs. So you have protein and veggies in all your other meals, and you can save up your calories for one meal to eat. I wouldn't recommend doing this for more than one day a week, mostly just because it's just a lot of work, if that makes sense. But if you are planning on going out to really enjoy yourself and you are trying to be as serious as you can about getting to your results, this is an important thing you can do. If you're going out with people, I would always say have a plan. This is a big one. So like know what you're doing ahead of time. So Preeti, as you're talking about, if you're going to go in and you want to have a salad and you're going to enjoy it, cool, right? And you want to plan for it, that's great. Or if you want to have a green day and then you're like, hey, or like a lean day where you're going to eat protein and veggies, and then at night you're going to enjoy yourself. What I mean by a plan is like, I'm going to have 2 drinks, I'm going to order this thing, and then I'm going to enjoy myself, and that's it. That's what I'm mainly talking about, because having a plan going in limits other things from happening and it allows you to stay on course more. It's also easier to say no to other people and no to other things because we already have that plan built out. This is a really valuable tip. And then binge eating episodes, they're going to happen here and there, whether it's like Thanksgiving or Easter, which is tomorrow, whatever. Days happen like this. The best thing I can say is just get back on track. Like forgive yourself. Days like this happen. One day out of the year, handful of days out of the year aren't going to offset your goal. Don't worry about it. Don't beat yourself up. Just do your best to go back to what you're doing and don't overcompensate. This is, I think what we're talking about before the call, Samantha, is people swing the pendulum very hard one direction and then they'll overeat one day and then they swing it too hard the other day going, I need to go super lean. I need to, and then it just creates more problems than it solves. So after days like this, just get right back on track. Don't overreact, don't underreact, just kind of get back to what you were doing, if that makes sense. So before we get into like interpreting results, any kind of questions or anything we went over ahead of time or just went over? A lot of stuff. Cool. Okay, great. So a lot of things. First note I want to talk about is this. When it comes to interpreting results, weight spikes happen, especially because a lot of the people who bought this, who are doing this program are women. So we're gonna have weight spikes around your menses, times of unfiltered eating, alcohol. So when you have a spike in weight that looks literally like these, and this is funny because this is actually from one of our female clients, and her weight spikes are pretty consistent on her cycle. And then you'll have other days where like they'll go out to maybe and I think in this one, she actually went out to Vegas and like, or with a bunch of friends, and we had a high weight spike. Now the goal is like, you will just want to be understanding that weight spikes will happen, but what we're looking for are two things. We're looking for trends and new lows, right? And this is a literal client. So this is, she has a low, she had a weight spike, and then she had a low a few days later. She had a new low, a weight spike, a new low. And when we look at this, I am much less concerned about these spikes. And I'm like, we're trending down and we have new lows, right? And then things slow down a little bit over in this area. And it could just be because we haven't made any changes. But in this time frame, this client from here to here, and this is over of a 12-week period, ended up losing about 20 pounds. Like this is, I think 139, I think this is 160. So, and there are spikes along the way, and there are some hard times along the way, but the goal was, is we kept chipping away and making changes. Now, this is another client we have, where her weight is a little bit less. Like this is definitely a pretty big trend. This is where a new low is a little bit harder to see, right? So this is the recent dates up top. And then you can see down low, this is about a week difference, but 141, 148, 148, 40.8, 140.8, 142.2, 141.6. Now, in this, I'll look at this and go, okay, we overall had, at least in the week, this week time frame, we ended up losing 0.6 of a pound. Now, it's hard to see because she dropped here and then went up and then back down, but I still consider this a pretty big win in this week period. Like, and for this client, she reached out, she was like, hey, I hit a new low. And this client's been with me for like 3 years. And she was like, hey, I hit a new low, 140.4, pretty excited about this. Even though it's like, somebody might look at that and go, it's only 0.4 down. This lady's pretty lean already, super strong. So 0.4 coming down pretty slow allows her to maintain her strength and a few other things. But that's what I'm looking for. I'm not concerned with this day. Like, I have no idea what happened here, and I really don't care. Like, it could be a bajillion things. My attitude is like, I have no idea what happened on this day, but I also, it's very easy to confabulate what happened. Like, oh, was it because you're stressed? Was it sleep? Was it whatever? Like, I have no idea. But whatever happened on Tuesday was actually probably a product of whatever happened on Monday. And I really don't want to get obsessed with what's going on. I just want to see, like, let's be as consistent as we can, right? There's that consistency check, and let's see what's going on. Now, if there isn't, like, this is a long-term weight gain from a client, and this weight gain was actually literally from like Thanksgiving to New Year's is when this was. And this is a really hard period of time. This person works in the medical field, and this is really tough. Like, this was a really, really rough period of time for people in healthcare, just due to coronavirus and working OT and everything going on. This lady had a really, really, really tough time. And this is just some steady weight gain. And now they're actually in the clear again. Life's a lot easier. We're on our way back down. But I want to talk about, this is what actual weight gain looks like. Like, and I'm not bashing her. This is just a really hard period of time. We tried and tried and tried. We did what we could. But like, when instead of like this spike, like this client where it went up by, 1.2 in a week, this, I wouldn't consider weight gain. Like, for you to actually gain this much weight, I'm like, you'd have to really, really overeat by a substantial amount of calories. It's mostly water, something else. This is what long-term weight gain looks like, if that makes sense. And this is obviously still in a better place. She came down from a pretty far spot, but in general, this is what it would look like over time, is this steady gain. So when it comes to weight gain, what I'm always looking at is 1 to 3 days, I'm not too concerned. But once it starts getting past 3 days, my radar goes up. I'm like, hey, something is happening. What's going on? Let's start paying more attention and start really paying attention to our weighing of food, what we call bites, licks, and tastes. And I have a thing on this a little bit later. And how much are we eating out? Like, if we're eating out quite a bit, then we really want to start paying attention because something could be going on. Oftentimes it's literally just a weighing thing. And like we're eating more like bites, licks, and tastes. It's usually not a steady change. Now, in this person's situation, it was very hard for her to stay on track. One, for the holidays, two, for just stress of that time. She was at work 14 hours a day in a hospital in a very demanding setting. So I get it. And then now we're in the clear. We're moving in a really good direction again. So this is what like, and I want to bring this up because there's spikes, but in general, moving in a solid direction. Samantha, do you have a question?
Yes. How often do you think you should weigh yourself, or do you think it changes depending on where you are in your journey?
That's a good question. It's a little of both. I think when people are more aggressive, when you're looking for more aggressive results, so as an example, Preeti is working with me at this moment, I like a daily weigh-in. And the reason why I like a daily weigh-in, like with this, like how this person is right here, and they'll miss some days, but it gives me a much better understanding because if this person is only weighing once a week, let's say this person's weighing twice a week, and they weigh in on a Friday and they weigh in on a Tuesday, this person can easily think they're gaining weight, like just from these results, right? Or even if it's Friday and Wednesday, right? Like it's very easy to be like, oh my God, I'm not moving in a good direction. With a daily weigh-in, I think it's better. However, if you have anxiety or stress about it, please don't do it. Like, don't do anything that makes you give you more anxiety. I do think a 3-day-a-week measurement is still fine. I think a minimum a week measurement is going to be okay. Now, with a week measurement, we always have to be aware that it's harder to pinpoint what's going on when the further out we're weighing. So if you're weighing once a week, we have a whole week to like, and this is what we call turnover of info. If it's once a week, let's say you weigh in a week and it's high, then we have to be like, what the hell is going on? And then we have to make a change, wait another week and see what happens. And if that change doesn't work, then we got to wait another week to see what's kind of going on, right? So it ends up being a long turnover of information. If it's 3 times a week, we can have 1 or 2 weigh-ins and be like, hey, something's not right. Let's revisit our consistency. Let's revisit our weighing and measuring. Let's see what happens. And then within a week, we can figure out what's kind of going on. So it's a much faster turnover of info the more frequent you weigh in, but it also has to do with your own anxiety. I think 3 times a week is fine. I think that gives you a pretty broad data set to really catch some stuff. I think if you're like really in a point where you're like, I'm trying to get super, super lean, I would do a daily weigh-in at that point. When it comes to like you're expecting results, I'm all about the daily weigh-ins. I used to not be, to be honest. I used to think it was stupid, but a really good friend of mine talked me into doing it, and I'll probably never go back with, unless somebody doesn't enjoy a daily weigh-in. Does that help with that?
Yeah.
Cool. Good. So this is within a week. If there's no change in your weight within a week, and even if that change like 0.4, I would just go back and look at what you're doing. If it's within 1 week, I would just be like, once again, just double check and be honest with yourself. How accurate were you? How consistent were you? That'll clear up a lot of things. And I really mean that. Like looking at your accuracy and consistency clears up a ton. Changing and then changes that will drive your results. And this is where we start getting into the stuff that you're asking about a little bit more, Samantha, is that I always want you to triple check your macros first. And I mean this, like how close were you to your actual protein intake? How close were you to your actual macro intake? And go back to that first. If you are doing that and you are doing really, really well, then I would remove, and you're like, yeah, I hit my goals and I'm not seeing results. I would then remove 5 grams of fat or 10 grams of carbs. This is roughly the same amount of calories, but remove 5 grams of fat, 10 grams of carbs. This is about 50 calories. So Samantha, because you don't have premium, I would just maybe drop it by 50 calories. And then it'll just take it from whatever the percentages are. And then I would just see what happens the following week. The reason I like 50 is it's low enough where it shouldn't impact your results. But if you do that consistently, like let's say you're not getting results, right? And you drop it by 50 calories, and then you still don't get results, and you drop it by another 50 calories. And that's enough to continue to push you into this zone of getting like at least 0.4 pounds a week. You can just chill there. I think the problem people make is they make large chunks of changes and not systematic changes. The other nice thing is if we make a systematic change, like just this little thing, at the end of a month, you can chip away 200 calories. And 200 calories, if you were getting results initially, if you were getting results and then it stopped, chipping away 200 calories would definitely put you in a place of getting results again. that makes sense. So and we don't need to do so much where you get hungry and then we need to backtrack. I'm a huge believer. I hate backtracking with people. Like, it makes me crazy going like, let's add some calories, let's take some calories back. But the nice thing is when it's small like this, it's very easy because we're not such large numbers where backtracking 50 calories is going to make a difference in your results. Like moving it forward, moving it a little bit back, we can find a sweet spot for you to feel good at and keep moving forward. So, and I'll usually alternate these. Like if you are in premium, I'll go like 10 grams of carbs one week, 5 grams of fat the next week. You can see I'm not removing protein though. The reason why is I want to keep protein, and this is number 5, proportional to your body weight typically. That 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight, I like to keep it there. So Samantha, because of you and because of, if you don't have premium, Preeti, I don't think you have premium either. But what you might want to do is every now and then just reset the protein percentage higher so that way it goes back to your body weight. You might have to do that every several adjustments. I wouldn't be too obsessed with it, but every now and then I would just reset it back to your body weight to keep it there. Now that might mean that over time that you're going to find that protein is going to escalate to a higher and higher percent. That is super normal the further you get into a diet. Like people who are dieting for like physique shows, right before they're about to like diet to be on stage, you might be eating 60% of their calories from protein, but that's just because the leaner you get, protein has to stay relative to how much muscle mass you have and your body weight. And as I mentioned earlier, the last thing we want you to do is lose muscle mass because that's what gives you shape and size. So we always want to keep that super duper duper high. So we remove a little bit of calories, some fat, some carbs. We repeat that a few times. And then usually I'll do this once or twice, and then I'll start adding some steps in. So steps in and this is another important thing, just daily steps. I'm a huge believer in this. Adding a couple steps in to keep your actual like NEAT up or your actual activity level up over time. And we usually just loop through this to keep driving results. And there is a bottom to this, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Samantha, do you have a question? It's okay if you don't. Cool.
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. So now with this, there is a point where this sucks, and that's where kind of plateaus come in. Now, a couple things. Plateaus usually don't happen right away. And once again, with a weight spike, that's not a plateau. Like this lady is not having a plateau. When there's a spike up here, that's not a plateau. Even with this, like this client reached out to me at one point and she's like, I'm having a plateau. And I'm like, you're not. And what we did with her was she actually had high calorie days. She was having multiple high calorie weekends that weren't being logged. And I was like, let's actually just have a really killer weekend. And then immediately her weight dropped down. And she was like, oh, okay. It was just like something she was doing. Most plateaus happen from these things: bites, licks, and tastes and snacks. So like, let's say mindless eating is a huge factor in plateaus. Well, not weighing and measuring foods, huge factor in plateaus. This one is a common one too. The further you get into a diet, your metabolism slows down. This is normal. This is not a bad thing. The less you eat, the more your metabolism slows down. There's no way around this. But what happens is over time, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that we want to reset and climb the calories back up over time. And this is what we'd call a maintenance phase or reverse dieting. I would encourage you to do this. Once calories get to a point where literally, like the best way I can say is things just suck. Like at some point your calories get so low where you're hungry a lot, your calories get so low, you're just not motivated to continue eating that way. And that's when I would definitely switch gears and go back the other direction, or just your compliance. Like you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. That's a really good time to switch gears and start adding food back in to a point where you do feel better about yourself and your training strength resumes and everything else. And then once again, just high calorie unlogged days is a super common reason why people plateau. But don't worry about this. People get super obsessed about like your metabolism slowing. It's normal. It's because you weigh less. It's because you move less. And those two things alone mean you use less heat energy. Like you're burning less heat energy because you're a smaller person. And you have less heat energy because it's easier to heat a smaller unit, like a smaller body. And because you're moving less, it takes less energy to move your body. Like it's all that's going on here. So it's nothing that's like severe. It's nothing that's abnormal. It's just temporary changes. Once we get you eating normally again, it just bounces right back. So really important thing I want to bring about this. I think people freak out and they hear metabolism slowing and they start getting like scared, but it's a normal process of stuff that happens. So Any questions about plateaus? We're coming up to the end of this, and this is taking a little. This is going a little bit longer, but this is really thorough, and I'm really happy with how this is turning out. So, weight gain and recomp, and this is what we're talking about. So, weight gain and recomp. Some people were asking about weight gain. It's very similar to the dieting down. We're just going up. So with weight gain, we want to go a little bit slower about the process, like 0.2 grams, or that should say, sorry, 0.2 pounds. It's actually what that should say. So 0.2 pounds in a week or every 2 weeks is the minimum I would accept. The reason why we want weight gain to go slower is because you can put on fat. And because you can put on fat, we want you to make sure that we're climbing in weight slower. And then same idea though, I would make the jumps a little larger. So like we add 5 grams of fat and 10 grams of carbs every 2 weeks instead of every week. And then we just make sure it's happening. So that way we're not going up so fast, we're minimizing fat gain. But after a month, we're adding in 180 calories, 200 calories every month. But we're also making sure that we're looking at things every 2 weeks. With weight gain, I look at a bi-weekly, every other week assessment versus a weekly one, just because fat gain can happen and it's a slower process. Like for somebody who's trying to gain muscle, we might only have them gain 10 pounds of muscle in 6 months to a year. So it's a much slower process because lean body mass, building muscle just takes time. And that's why it's like this. It's not because we want to rapidly gain weight. Things just take time and training needs to be on point. So it's going to be a more methodical approach moving forward with it, if that makes sense. Now, recomp. Preeti, we talked about this. The more and more I think about recomp, the more and more this becomes a starting place I want to be with people who are what I quote unquote call chronic dieters. So as I mentioned before, there is some evidence about the more you diet, the harder and harder it is for diet to deliver results. And I think a recomp is a really good place to start. A recomp would be like giving you your baseline calories. So instead of saying like, I'm trying to lose a pound a week or half a pound, just being like, what does it take for you to maintain your weight? And then really hammer them down, hitting their protein intake, their training program, and increasing their steps over time. I think this is an absolute fabulous way for most people to go with their training, especially if you're not in a point of you're trying to get lean. You just try to slowly increase your steps and your activity level, eat your maintenance calories, really hammer down your protein intake, and really good things happen, if that makes sense. At this time, carb timing is really helpful too. What carb timing is just keeping a bulk of your carbohydrates right around your workouts. So like 50 to 75% of your daily carbs can be stuck right around your workouts, if that makes sense. And this is an awesome solution for a lot of people. What recomp is basically building muscle, losing fat. Especially if they've been a chronic dieter for periods of time. Preeti, we've obviously talked about this a couple times. The more and more I work with more people who are in a stage where they've been off and off diets, more and more, the more I'm like, I think this is a better place to start than trying to initially lose weight. But to be honest, the research on this is really weird and there's just not enough science on it. It's a really kind of an odd thing to study, if that makes sense. But cool. Brings us into reverse dieting. So this is kind of the last thing. Yo, do either one of you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, and I don't know if this is the right forum, but we've never really talked about intermittent fasting. Do you mind like spending a minute or two going over that?
Question. So one of the things, so the way to look at intermittent fasting, and this is being blunt about it, there's no fat loss benefit strictly to intermittent fasting. The way intermittent fasting operates is by 2 mechanisms. Oh, I guess technically there's a few mechanisms, but intermittent fasting, there's a few versions of it, which is either going to be time restricted eating, alternate day fasting, or what we'd call a VLCD, which is a very low calorie diet, which is having some days that are like 400 to 600 calories. So intermittent fasting, one as a body, is hard to narrow down because there's so many options. But intermittent fasting typically works by this. It restricts the calories you're having within a day. So let's say you have, and this is a really good way of looking at it. Some people may not, if you only have 1,200 calories to eat, some people may not like spreading out 1,200 calories over 4 or 5 meals. That might be too small a meal for them to really enjoy themselves and to actually feel nourished. That same person may really like having 2 600 calorie meals. So we just take those the same calorie meals and we stick them right next to each other. And this is actually an okay strategy for some people because they'd rather eat 2 larger meals semi close to each other because they might feel more full. And that allows them to be more consistent long term. But the fasting aspect of itself is not what the benefit is. It's the benefit that this person may be less adherent to a plan that's more spaced out and more adherent to a plan that's stuck together. And there's lots of research within people on intermittent fasting, and all the research comes back that it's not better than a regular calorie diet. It's the same, but what is happening is we are creating calorie restrictions differently through, like, instead of somebody necessarily counting their calories, we're restricting it by a window or lowering it by not having calories on some days than others, if that makes sense. So it's kind of how it works. But if your goal is to follow it, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people, like I said, you in particular may find it easier to hit your protein having just 2 meals a day, where you can actually like have some more carbs with that meal, have more protein, and have a more balance. And that might be way easier for you to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. Yeah. And that's actually something, we have another client who's has a really hard time getting protein in. And she's like, I feel like my carbs are too small at my other meals. She's like an example is she might have to have like a half a cup of rice at a meal, every meal. And she's like, I don't want to do that. It's stupid. It's too little. And we're like, why don't you just have skip a meal and move it later, or just have protein and veggies in one meal, and then the other meals you could have a larger serving of it, so that way you can actually feel like you're eating, like enjoying the pleasure of it. And that's a really important thing, because those kind of changes are more like logistical, but they definitely go a super long way.
And it's important to be consistent. If I was following that.
Yes, consistency. There is kind of an odd thing, but the more consistent you are, the more habitual you are about what you do, the better your results are going to be, because there's less variables and it's just better in general. Like somebody who eats erratically has way worse results, I've noticed. And it might just be because there's a host of reasons it can be, but the more like rhythmic you are with your like processes, the better it is, because there's way less variables. It's easier to spot what's going wrong, and it's easier for you to stay on track when things are much more like systematic and rhythmical versus it being like all over the place every single time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So kind of, yeah, good question. So going back to, we talked about the reverse dieting. After like 12 weeks of dieting hard or a longer period of time, once calories get so low, the goal here is to slowly add calories back in over time. What this does is it allows you to eat a higher calorie amount with your body weight rarely getting an impact. Now, without getting too detailed here, what this is going to get into is basically like we would add 10 grams of carbs and 5 grams of fat, and then watch what your body does. And we would continue to do this over time. And this is after a very hard phase of dieting. So what we want you to do is get back to maintenance calories, but we don't just want to go from eating like 1,100 calories to 2,000 calories in a day. We want to gradually add that process up, because your metabolism is going to rebound. And we don't want you to rebound hard. Now, when you are eating more carbs and you are eating more food, you are going to gain a little bit of water weight. It's really normal on that side of things. But outside of an initial 3 to 4 pounds, your body weight shouldn't go up very much. It should slowly go up over time. So like Samantha, like let's say you pushed your weight really hard, you got super lean, and after there's a point in your dieting phase where you're like, this kind of sucks to do. Like it's not fun dieting. It's really hard. You're finding yourself being tired. At that point, we may want to reverse diet, and we start adding, like I said, 10 grams of carbs, 5 grams of fat on a weekly basis, maybe starting off more aggressively and then tapering it down over time once your weight becomes stable. So initially it might be like we start adding this stuff for a few weeks, and then your weight kind of maybe goes up by 3 or 4 pounds, which is normal. And then it'll level off. And then we would start doing it maybe every other week to maybe once a month to maybe like we just keep you there for some time. And the benefit of this is we've actually had clients who were eating, and this is actually with, I'll kind of go up to this lady, with this person right here, where we ended up getting her down. She ended up losing 35 pounds and got super lean and was really strong. But then when we did her reverse diet, she was eating the same amount of calories she was when she started. So she was eating the same amount of calories she was when she started, but now she weighs 30 pounds less. And that's a really fun time, because then when you get to eat a lot and you're super strong and you're training really hard, that's always really fun. That's where like things get really enjoyable, because you just get stronger and stronger. And then it sets us up for another phase of dieting down in the future. But this takes time. To her to get to eating her maintenance calories and above, it took us about 3 months of doing a reverse diet to getting her to that phase. And then another couple months before she felt ready to do another push, if that makes sense. And then once we do another push, we just restart the process over. We cut some more calories, and then we go back down for another phase. Cool, and that's pretty much it. I mean, and then we got some other stuff in here, but man, that was a lot. Do you guys have any questions on here?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, what's up, Samantha?
So, and during the summer, I'm going to go on a vacation for a week. Would I just be better trying to switch it off to like maintenance calories for that week?
Yeah, that's a good question. The best thing I could say is you're probably not going to lose weight. I would just do whatever. To be honest, like what I would try to do is just try to maybe hit your protein and then get veggies in when you can, and then just like not let everything go overboard. If you're in a place, because the thing that makes traveling and vacations hard is people tend to eat on the go a lot, or like eat at places and restaurants and enjoy yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we want you to do is like, we just don't want it to get over and out of control. Like don't eat as much as you can every single meal. Try to get some protein in your meals, try to get some veggies in your meals, and just know that like, we just don't want it to get like out of control every single meal. And usually that alone, like you're going to gain some water weight and maybe like a very little bit of weight, but like, it's not going to be anything that's going to offset you or hurt you. You could do a maintenance calorie kind of thing, but in general, maybe you just may not want to track at that time, and then just kind of try to get your protein in, get some veggies, enjoy yourself, but not let it get out of control. Like my mentor was like, don't eat like an asshole when you're on vacation. He was like, just enjoy yourself, but like, just don't let it get to where you're like trying to overeat in every single meal, and usually things will be okay.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a really common one. And then other than that, anybody have any other, there's a lot of other stuff in this document as an FYI. There's a bunch of sample diets. There's also some stuff about stress eating. Some people had about that, but that's going to be a little more challenging to go over. So the big thing is like, once you start getting into where you're tracking accurately, I would check the consistency thing, make sure you're consistent as you can. And then we chip away calories, make sure you're following the plan, and we just keep continuing to chip a little by little, keep the protein kind of high as proportional you can to your body weights. And then over time, like maybe once a month, add some steps in. Usually following that process will get you to a very good place.
Yeah, I think this session was super helpful. It actually answered a lot of my questions that I had about the plateau that I feel like I'm hitting. So yeah, and I think I got the answers.
Good. Yeah. And
I think it's probably just my weekends. They're off.
Yeah. And most of the time, like, I hate doing this to people, but whenever I see like days that have like one food item entry, and this is like just, I'm like, there's no way they only ate one thing. I'm like, there's no way that happened. But I'm also not like, my relationship, and we obviously work together. Like, I don't want to call you, like, it's a very delicate process to call people out and be like, yo, what the F is going on this week, like this weekend? I had to, there's a time and a place for it, but like, sometimes I'm like, man, you gotta like know when to ask. But in general, yeah, like we had a client when we had our studio who wasn't like losing weight. She's like, what's going on? And I was like, weigh your food. She's like, I am. And I was like, no, like really weigh everything. And she came back like a week later and she's like, oh, I dropped like 2 pounds. She was just lax. People get really lax with stuff, and it's understandable. And that doesn't mean that like, that's not a you thing. It's just human nature is we get comfortable. So we add a little bit more food in, we grab a couple more snacks. So like usually my first answer to a plateau is be diligent, like weigh everything, measure things, check the mindless eating stuff first. Because that's going to solve 90% of the problems. And then get consistent. And then once we can do that, then we're like, okay, cool, let's chip away. Because what happens is if we're not accurate and we start chipping food away, we start needlessly low, like think of it like this. If we're chipping food away, but we're really having these high calorie weekends, it's kind of like we're just in a place where we spin our wheels. And then things just get really weird, because then we're never really addressing what the big issue is, which is like managing and moderating the weekends to a point where you enjoy yourself, but you're also getting results. And that's what happened with one of our other clients. Like she legitimately, she knows this stuff. And she was like, I think my metabolism is broken. And I'm like, your metabolism is broken. She's like, no, I really think it is. And I'm like, and I pulled up her, and I didn't mean to do, I hate doing this stuff, but I like pulled it up. Like I'm like, all right, I'm like, I'm going to be really direct with you for a minute. I'm like, see how these 3 days are like, they're not logged? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, what's going on here? Like something is happening that's not being told to me. And I know what it's like, because when I have to report to my coach, I do the same thing. I'm like, I have missing days too. And he knows exactly what's going on. And I'm like, yeah, I ate some more In-N-Out than I liked. I had a bunch of X, Y, and Z. And he's like, yeah, I know that, because that's what the common behavior is. So the answer is always not necessarily like we're trying to judge you, but what we want to do is at least just be aware of it and try to minimize it from like a full day of unfiltered eating to maybe a meal. And then now we're really regulating stuff. And when that client did that, she ended up seeing her weight was really erratic for weeks. It was like gain 4 pounds on a Monday, lose it by Friday, and then it was just a repeated like these weight spikes over and over and over again. And when I see that, I'm like, something is going on the weekend that's causing us to retain a lot of water. We don't have enough time to continue to break whatever that is. And we're just in this infinite cycle of frustration. And that's kind of where like having that and being honest with yourself about stuff is very valuable, but it's very hard. It's very easy to be like, there's something else going on, and not like it's my weekends that are doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Samantha, do you have any other questions, or how was this today?
I thought this talk was pretty good and greatly in depth.
Cool. Yeah. And if you guys have any other questions, please shoot me a message. I'd love to go over this stuff more with you. Other than that, that'll probably be it today. This was long, but it was really, really good. I'm really happy we did this. The guides are for you. There's tons of videos and other stuff and downloads. So Sam, if you ever have any questions, you're like, hey, I'm stuck and I need some help, please reach out. I would love to go over this stuff a little bit more. And then for everybody else who's watching this as a recording, if you guys have questions and want to go over everything, please reach out to me. Cool. That's going to be it today, everybody. Sam, thanks for jumping on. Preview, thanks for being here. And then enjoy the rest of your weekends, guys. Enjoy Easter. And if you guys have any questions, let me know.
Thanks, you too.
Cool. That is it.